So what's good, TMG fam? It's your boy L, and I'm back with some more craziness of the world. But before we get to that, man, please help me unplug some more people out of the Matrix. And you do that by spamming the like button and then putting hashtag unplugged in the comment section. All right? And subscribe if you're new. Let's get to the craziness.
For decades, the United States has been a leader in satellite navigation technology. The U.S. Global Positioning System, or GPS as most of us know it, was initially designed as a military tool and is used for things like missile guidance and drone operation. But the technology has also become indispensable to the lives of civilians, with use cases going far beyond point-to-point navigation.
GPS is the only constellation that's used for aviation for international flights.
There's 6 billion users around the world that use GPS. GPS is used in all facets of daily life, to include telecommunications, to include financial transactions, agriculture, as well as even ride-sharing services and newer capabilities as they come on board.
Over the course of the past decade plus, we've seen trillions of dollars of economic activity coming from GPS.
A 2019 study estimated that loss of GPS service would constitute a $1 billion per day impact on the U.S.
Jeez.
If we had an attack on the system, it could really bring so many areas of our logistics and our supply chain, even farming and our transportation system, our airplane system, to a grinding halt.
But the U.S.
See, this is why I hate that we have a tendency of putting all our eggs in one basket and being so reliant on this one thing, whether it be GPS or the internet or electricity or whatever it is, man. We just put our eggs in one basket, bro. We need to start having a backup plan for the backup plan that's for the backup plan. Sheesh.
Our transportation system, our airplane system, to a grinding halt.
But the US is not the only superpower to have developed satellite navigation technology. In 2020, China launched the last satellite needed to complete its own global navigation system, Beto, which translates to Big Dipper. And experts say it's challenging US GPS in more ways than one.
Over the last 20 years, they have moved from putting satellites over China to putting satellites in the region to providing global coverage as of 2020. That is a very rapid advancement. It's not just seen as a military tool, it is seen as a tool of diplomacy. One analyst has called Beto with Beijing's declaration of independence from the West, and I think that sums it up beautifully.
What we're seeing here is very much a statement that China are looking to reinforce this belief that they've got serious infrastructure to underpin their military ambitions, to underpin their defense ambitions, and also to reassure their allies that they've got the capability to deal with any threat that comes their way.
That's not good. That's not good at all.
The United States started launching its own navigation satellite systems in 1978, and today we have 4 different major global systems. That's the Russian system GLONASS, it's the European Galileo, and it's China's Beto. And China's Beto is the newest entrant among this constellation of satellite navigation systems, but the United States GPS system was the first, and it has been the satellite system of choice for some time.
Orbiting the Earth at an altitude of about 12,550 miles, today's GPS constellation is made up of 31 satellites. The satellites work in tandem with a network of ground stations and antennas that are used to monitor, control, and send data to the constellation. Finally, devices equipped with GPS receivers track the radio signals emitted by each satellite to determine the exact location of the user based on how long it takes for those signals to arrive. The more satellites a device can see, the more accurate the location. GPS is owned by the US government and run by the Space Force, an independent military branch that's organized under the Air Force. Historically, the world of satellite navigation technology has been collaborative, with each country or group of countries, in the case of Galileo, offering use of their respective systems to the international community for free. In a civilian capacity, this means that individuals and companies can take advantage of multiple constellations for better accuracy and coverage. But which navigation system a user has access to depends largely on the equipment manufacturer.
Your civil phone is able to bring in the GPS constellation. They're able to bring in other navigation satellite system like Galileo, like Beto, and they choose to. The phone is doing the selection as to what satellite it's using. You as the user are agnostic to it. You just care that it's getting you from point A to point B.
Many of the latest phones from manufacturers including Apple, Samsung, and Huawei support all of the global navigation systems. What system a person uses depends on what satellites are in their range at the time, with the phone automatically connecting to the best signal. Still, China has understood the importance of having its own global navigation system for years, says Sarah Sewell, who served as the Undersecretary of State for Civil Security, Democracy, and Human Rights before becoming an executive at venture firm InQtel.
The Chinese have said that when they lost the ability to track missiles that they had launched in one of the altercations during the Taiwan Straits crisis, they decided that that was a real wake-up call and that they needed to have their own system in order to be able to ensure continued coverage, the degree of accuracy that they wanted, and to not be relying on another nation for something that was so vital for their military operations.
The first Beto satellites were launched in 2000 and served only mainland China. Now, China's Beto constellation is made up of 45 operational satellites, with 30 of those being the latest generation BDS-3 satellites. Like GPS, Beto's satellites work in tandem with a network of about 120 ground stations located around the world. According to Chinese state media, the Beto system served over 1.1 billion users in 2022. One reason for this wide-scale adoption, experts say, is that China has invested aggressively in subsidizing ground infrastructure and supplying services to countries that are not well served by GPS.
There are parts of the developing world, particularly Africa, parts of Asia, sometimes South America, where not only are the American systems not visible because the US constellation is smaller than Beto's system, but the ground stations that amplify and increase the accuracy of the signal are not existent for GPS, but may exist and increasingly exist for Beto.
Beto's rapid growth could have some serious implications for the US. For one, now that China is no longer reliant on GPS, some experts worry that China may be emboldened to target it.
Our GPS system today is very vulnerable, so it would be unfortunately all too easy to disrupt the services of the GPS, spoof the GPS system, and really make it quite difficult and dangerous even for use on the ground.
One featuring
Great. That's what we need. Something that we're so reliant on heavily, by the way, for them to just come in and manipulate if they want to. So that makes sense with all the threats earlier in the year and stuff, and worrying about if China was going to invade Taiwan and if we were going to step in and back and forth like that. They're thinking several steps ahead. I hope we are too.
Beto's latest satellites that's missing in the US GPS fleet is known as TwoWay Messaging.
GPS beams out, to put it really simply. And two-way messaging means that you beam back. And when you beam back, your location is revealed.
Currently, this feature is mainly available in China and allows users to send short text messages in areas without ground network cell coverage. The Chinese government has touted use of the technology as a tool for search and rescue missions. But as Beto matures, experts worry about the system being used in a much more pervasive way.
The bigger fear right now is really that you will see a movement into this Beto system. So you will see a movement of people who suddenly have apps on their phone using this system, and that suddenly just becomes a tracking device and an information device and a surveillance device for the Chinese. And that's something that I think is as dangerous or more dangerous than any sorts of attacks on our own system.
If you want to start using the two-way messaging for other kinds of applications, and for example, in the self-driving car scenario, you're talking about transmitting more data. You're talking about being able to provide that service and therefore track those locations at a far greater scale than is even imaginable today. And that begins to look a lot like a surveillance capability with privacy concerns.
Sewell says that for now, conducting this type of large-scale surveillance is unlikely, as the Beto system is currently limited by the amount of data transmissions it can handle. Use of Beto's two-way messaging feature also requires special chips that are currently not widely available in the consumer market, though some electronics makers are beginning to adopt them. Last year, Apple also introduced an emergency SOS text feature in its phones using satellites from US-based satellite operator Globalstar. Experts say China's expansion of Beto goes far beyond military might. Like GPS did for the US, Beto is spurring massive economic development in China, to the tune of $156 billion by 2025. Beto is also helping China secure global influence.
China has tied the export of many of its other forms of infrastructure to the kinds of positioning, navigation, and timing data that it provides from Beto. And it integrates that with China's 5G offerings, and it subsidizes that through its Belt and Road and Digital Silk Road initiatives.
Still, some experts stress China's claims about Beto should be taken with a grain of salt.
I think it's really difficult to get an accurate picture of how many countries and how many companies are using Baidu. I think the figures that are officially released have to be treated with a degree of caution. One thing that is for certain, with the amount of satellites that are up there and with the capacity that Baidu now brings, its use is going to be only getting more and more widespread amongst a large portion of people on the planet.
This is scary.
As the oldest global positioning system,
Scary.
it stands to reason that GPS is in need of an update. And the government has been working to modernize it, but technical issues in both the satellites and ground infrastructure have caused delays. Out of the 31 satellites that make up the GPS constellation today, so far only 6 are the newest generation, known as GPS-3.
The problem that we're facing right now is less, I think, about a huge technological advantage in China. It's just a technological advantage in satellite orbit. We haven't got these systems up in orbit yet, and China has.
In 2008, Lockheed Martin beat out competitor Boeing, which manufactured many of the older GPS satellites, to build the first generation of GPS-3 satellites in a contract worth up to $3.6 billion. The company completed that contract earlier this year, delivering the 10th and last satellite in February. Lockheed is now working on manufacturing 22 GPS-3F satellites, which will feature even more advanced capabilities under a contract awarded in 2018. The entire fleet is expected to be modernized around 2032 or 2033.
We continue to look at how to bring in military signals that are giving us better power, better accuracy, better anti-jam. So with GPS-3 coming on with military code and giving you 8 times more anti-jam capability, and then our next version of satellites, GPS-3 follow-on, giving you 60 times more anti-jam capability in a regional area.
As things change, we want to ensure that we are ready to make adjustments, whether it be on the ground, whether it be in the user equipment, or whether it be from a satellite perspective. That flexibility is imperative for us to stay ahead of the threat.
Meanwhile, improved capability in GPS's civil signals could bolster new use cases, such as artificial intelligence and autonomous cars. The GPS-3 satellites will also have improved search and rescue capabilities. As a co-chair on the House GPS caucus, Representative Sherrill made it a mission to keep the conversation going about the importance of modernizing GPS.
Just because it's ubiquitous, just because you use it every day, you can't allow familiarity to breed contempt. You have to invest in it. You have to update it. We have to make sure that that system that we all now rely on so heavily is protected and upgraded and really resilient.
We need to use this question about GPS and the meaning of Beto as a way to ask ourselves broader questions about the digital infrastructure that will undergird the world. And I think the bigger question is, what does the West want the critical infrastructure of the globe to look like? And are they comfortable putting much of it in the hands of the Chinese Communist Party?
The House Oversight Subcommittee held a hearing on UAPs, or unidentified anomalous phenomena, this week, and heard testimony about object sightings and government possession of non-human material. One notable moment from the hearing was when whistleblower David Grush said the United States government is absolutely in possession of UAPs.
Mr. Grush, finally, do you believe that our government is in possession of UAPs?
Absolutely, based on interviewing over 40 witnesses over 4 years.
And where?
I know the exact locations, and those locations were provided to the Inspector General.
Grush also answered to the government finding non-human biologics along with crashed craft. Let's watch.
If you believe we have crashed craft, stated earlier, do we have the bodies of the pilots who piloted this craft?
As I've stated publicly already in my News Nation interview, biologics came with some of these recoveries. Yeah.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human.
Investigative journalist and author of UFOs, generals, pilots, and government officials go on the record. Leslie Kane joins us now to discuss. Thanks for being with us, Leslie.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So what do you make of that claim by Grush there of the non-human biologics?
Well, I mean, that is the most, probably the most explosive statement that was made in the whole hearing in terms of just trying to wrap your mind around something that hard to imagine, that there's actually biological material, if not bodies of non-human beings in the possession of the U.S. government. I have no way of knowing whether that's true or not. I have talked to others who have told me that it is true. But I think tracking down the crash retrieved objects, we may have a better chance of doing that than getting our hands on biological specimens. So I'm not in a position to know.
David Grush also said during his testimony that he has gathered this evidence from 40 people that he's interviewed. Do we have a sense of who these individuals are and whether or not how many of them actually had firsthand knowledge or direct access to the craft or biologics that were recovered?
We don't know who the specific individuals were, although there may have been some that have come forward, and whether they're part of that pool of 40, we don't really know. For instance, we had a couple of people in our story in the debrief that were supporting David Grush's testimony. But most of them, I believe, are not comfortable coming forward publicly because they don't feel safe. There's lots of restrictions on what people can do and say. They don't want to break their security oaths, or they may be uncomfortable that it might threaten their jobs or their careers in some way. They're afraid of retaliation, which is what happened to David Grush. So people are kind of waiting in the wings, I think, to see how things unfold. And then I think more and more will come public in support of him. And we will hear from people who have direct firsthand knowledge of these programs, which Grush didn't have.
So it sounds like there is a bit.
So let's be honest. It's going to be bad for some people. You know what I mean? And that's unfortunate. They don't deserve that. You know? Some people who step up are going to be potentially the sacrificial lamb. You know, that could be David Grush and the other two gentlemen that's up there on that panel. That could be some of the people that, of the 40 that he's speaking of and she's speaking of currently, you know? And that sucks, bro. It should not be like that. They shouldn't have to do that. They shouldn't have to go through that. They should be awarded the same luxury that anyone else have and protection to be able to step up and be honest and truthful with the American public. That's what they should be afforded, with no retaliation, no ramifications, nothing should happen to them. Their job, you know. And I know some people are gonna be like, well, you know, how can you trust someone that you have working for you if they're gonna go around chain of command and become a whistleblower and do certain things like that? Well, do the right thing. This probably could have been handled if, when they presented the information to them before, that they took them serious and they listened to their people and they took all of that into account. Maybe the first few you might not could have got away with, but when multiple people are constantly, like, highly decorated pilots are coming up to you and talking to you about this type of stuff, you should have begun to take that serious. That's all I'm saying.
Bit of breaking news today, moving out of this, about the subcommittee coming from McCarthy. Can you tell us a little bit about what you know about the subcommittee?
Yes, I did. I just heard from Burchett's office that the four members of the committee, the Appropriations Committee, who held the hearing, have written a letter to Speaker Kevin McCarthy. The four members are Mr. Burchett, Matt Gaetz, Luna, and Jared Moskowitz. And they have asked him for the formation of a select committee to investigate UAP. It would also involve the collection of information, and it would, conduct oversight, the issues around oversight that need to be addressed. And what's really important, I think, about this select committee is that it would have subpoena authority, so that this committee would be in position to subpoena some of the witnesses that we all want to hear from and or documents that maybe could be declassified for the public, because they've also focused on the problem of overclassification. They want to release more documents to the public. So it's very exciting development, and I hope that it happens.
And I understand you were at this hearing earlier in the week, Leslie. What was the mood like in the room? Did people seem to be taking this seriously? Were people kind of brushing it off or joking about it? And not just among congressional members, but the other people in the audience. How did they seem to react to some of this information that was coming out?
Yeah, the mood, Amber, was really just sort of joyful and everybody on high alert, everybody very excited. There were literally hundreds of people who lined up to get into this hearing, members of the public who could not get in because there just wasn't space. People started lining up at 2 a.m. in the morning, hours and hours and hours, stayed up all night to try to get in. So, and the mood, I did not get a sense of any disparaging or ridiculing or any kind of attitudes like that. It was very serious and very excited.
So we've seen a few viral moments that have gotten the most attention online. What happened in the hearing that you would point to that's worthy of attention that's not getting attention?
Well, that's a good question, because I do think some of the more, sensationalistic aspects of it are getting most of the attention. But there were a lot of other important points that were brought out. One of them, for instance, a need for pilots to report, to have a mechanism in which they can feel safe reporting. Ryan Graves mentioned that only 95% of that 95% of the pilots who do have sightings don't report them. I mean, that is a huge number. So something needs to be done to address that, because there's valuable data to be provided from these pilots, which isn't getting provided because they're afraid that they'll somehow harm their jobs, or that.
And then you have to ask yourself, if they're not reporting this, what else is there that they're not reporting? Once you lose that trust that you have, whether it be in a workplace scenario with your superior, once that trust is broken, then you don't think you could come to that person or people in that position with any type of information. You start holding them back more things. So it's already creating a division or a gap. This isn't good on all fronts.
They'll be ridiculed, or there's still a stigma against this. So that needs to be addressed. There was also a point brought up about satellite imagery. There must be a tremendous amount of satellite imagery. I'm sure some of the classified briefings have included it. Can some of that be brought up? There's issues around government oversight that need to be addressed. So there's, a lot, and there needs to be basically an investigation to follow up on what David Grush has provided, the specifics, because he did say that he has provided names, locations, program names, all the data that the members need in order to follow up on what he's telling them. So that was a major point, that an investigation needs to take place to find out if what he's saying is true.